A wealthy CEO stopped by to collect his suit. Then a young girl wearing cleaning gloves shook his world with 6 words. I want to purchase a father. The dry cleaner on 4th Avenue wasn't a place Michael Brooks thought anything important would occur. It was just a quick errand in his busy day. A routine pickup squeezed between a boardroom speech and a lunch with investors. He walked into the shop without much thought, glued to his phone, checking reports and planning upcoming deals. The buzz of machines, the scent of starch and soap, the sharp tone of the receptionist greeting people. All of it faded into the background until he noticed her. She was maybe 5 or 6 years old, a small figure crouched in a corner, dressed in a red sweater slightly too large, faded blue jeans worn at the knees, and bright yellow cleaning gloves that almost engulfed her tiny hands. In one gloved hand, she held a white cloth, scrubbing the tile floor with quiet focus. Her brow was creased. She wasn't playing around. Michael paused mid-step, puzzled. At first, he thought she might have strayed from her parents. Perhaps an employee had brought their kid to work. But the way she moved, her steady, rhythmic scrubbing, the tight line of her lips, seemed deliberate, not playful. She was genuinely working. After a brief pause, he knelt beside her. Not wanting to scare her, he spoke softly. Hey, little one. Are you lost? The girl looked up. Her deep brown eyes were serious, catching him off guard. There was no fear, just a weary calm. No, she said quietly. I'm here to work. Michael blinked, surprised by the steady, straightforward tone in her voice. Work, he repeated, more to himself. She nodded and returned to wiping the floor. I'm helping out. They let me. I'm earning cash. His heart tugged in an odd way, a strange pang beneath his usual drive for success and control. Why do you need to earn cash? He asked, unsure what response he expected. The girl stopped, sat back on her heels, and looked at him again. Her voice was softer now, almost cautious. So I can buy my dad back. Michael was stunned. The words didn't add up in any grown-up logical way, but her sincerity made his chest tighten. Before he could reply, a young woman from the staff hurried over, offering a nervous smile. I'm so sorry, she said quickly. She's not supposed to clean the floors. She just shows up sometimes and insists on helping. Michael stood, still watching the girl, who had returned to her task. She said she's earning money to buy her father. The woman paused, her expression softening. Her name's Lily. Her mom is very ill. Her dad left months ago, took all their savings, and vanished. Lily doesn't know that. She thinks he was taken or something, that she can earn enough to bring him back. Michael stared at Lily. She wasn't pretending to understand the world. She'd built a version of it that worked for her. To her, things weren't broken. They were just costly. Love, a father's presence, could be earned if she worked hard enough. He didn't know what to say. He didn't know why it struck him so deeply. Maybe because he understood what it felt like to be left behind as a child. Or maybe because, despite all his years of success and planning, nothing had ever made him feel as powerless as this little girl trying to scrub away her pain. He picked up his suit quietly, but before leaving, he glanced back once more. Lily was still on the floor, focused, careful. Michael left the dry cleaner that day with a perfectly pressed suit and a question he couldn't shake. What kind of world makes a child think love must be purchased? Michael didn't sleep well that night. The image of the little girl scrubbing the dry cleaner's floor stayed in his mind, vivid and persistent. It wasn't just her words. It was how she said them. Like it was obvious. Like it was a simple fact. I want to earn cash to buy my dad. No doubt, no fuss. Just a calm certainty. The kind that stayed with you long after it reached your ears. In his world of corporate deals and tough negotiations, those words hit harder than any failed merger or stock market dip. By the next morning, he'd made his decision. He wasn't going to brush this off. Getting involved in personal matters wasn't his style. He was known for keeping things neat and professional, emotions locked firmly out of the picture. But this wasn't something he could just file away and forget. He needed to know more. He needed to learn who this girl was, where she came from, and what had pushed her to believe she had to work to bring her father back. He canceled his morning appointment and headed back to the dry cleaner. Not in his usual crisp suit, but in casual jeans and a plain button-up shirt. The receptionist spotted him right away, looking surprised and a bit uneasy. Before she could ask what he wanted, he said, "Is Lily here?" She paused, glanced toward the back, then gestured for him to follow her. They walked down a narrow corridor to a small break room where Lily sat at a round table, her legs swinging as she nibbled on crackers from a plastic tub. She looked up and blinked, clearly recognizing him. Her body stiffened, but she stayed quiet. "Hey," Michael said gently, kneeling to her eye level. "Remember me?" She nodded slowly, her hand still inside the tub. "I'd like to talk to your mom," he said. "Is she close by?" Lily shook her head. "She's at home. She doesn't go out much now." "Is she okay?" The little girl shrugged, a motion that held far too much acceptance for a 5-year-old. "She gets tired. She says it's her bones." Michael felt something twist inside him. He thanked the staff, got the address, and left the shop with an odd feeling in his chest. Urgency, worry, and something close to dread. The apartment was in a worn-out building on the edge of town. Cracked steps led to a door with peeling paint. When he knocked, it took a while before he heard any movement. Finally, the door opened a few inches, and a pale, thin woman stood there. Her skin looked gray, and her hair was pulled into a messy bun that hadn't been brushed in days. She seemed exhausted but not surprised, as if she'd been expecting bad news and was relieved it hadn't arrived yet. "Sorry to disturb you," Michael said, keeping his voice soft. "I'm Michael Brooks. I met your daughter yesterday." She rested her forehead against the doorframe, her eyes closing briefly before opening again. "She didn't do anything wrong, did she?" "No," he said quickly. "Not at all. She's amazing. She said something yesterday that really threw me." Sarah Holland opened the door a bit wider. "Come in," she said, almost reluctantly, as if she didn't want to but was too tired to argue. The apartment was tidy but sparse. A used couch, a folding table, 2 chairs, and a small bookshelf with a few children's books. He noticed an oxygen tank in the corner and a pile of hospital bills on the kitchen counter. "She thinks she needs to buy her dad," Michael said once they were seated. Sarah gave a dry, fragile laugh. "Of course she does." "I didn't tell her the truth." "Why?" Her voice broke slightly as she answered. "Because I didn't want to be the one to shatter her heart. He left us, took all we had, my savings, her college fund, even the emergency cash. He didn't say goodbye. He just vanished. I thought if I told her he'd been taken or stuck somewhere, she wouldn't feel so abandoned. I didn't think she'd take it so literally." Michael glanced around the room again, noting the worn furniture, the frail woman before him, the slight tremble in her hands. "And you? What's your health like?" She paused before answering. "Stage 3 lymphoma. It's aggressive. I've been doing chemo when I can, but regular treatments are too expensive. I'm trying. I'm fighting. But some days I'm just holding on until she's asleep." The words lingered in the air like smoke. Michael had faced billion-dollar investors, handled corporate battles, and let go of executives without a second thought. But nothing in his career had prepared him for this. A dying mother, a child scrubbing floors for an impossible dream, and a home held together by fragile hope. He took a slow breath. "Let me help you." Sarah's face hardened. "With respect, we've had people offer help before. Most meant well, but they didn't stick around. They saw a sick woman and a sad kid, paid a bill or dropped off groceries, then disappeared. I'm not like them, he said. You're a CEO, she said with a weary smile. You're used to solving problems with money. I'm also a man who knows what it's like to grow up without a father and feel like it's your fault, he replied. Please, let me do something. Sarah looked at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she nodded. Then, start by being someone she doesn't have to buy. With that, everything Michael thought he knew about value and worth quietly shifted. He wasn't just a man offering a donation or trying to feel good about himself. He was standing at the edge of something deeply human, something real, something he didn't fully grasp yet, but couldn't walk away from. Michael returned to his office that afternoon, but the sterile glass walls and the polished silence of his executive floor felt different. The numbers on his computer screen blurred in and out of focus, and the meetings he joined seemed far away, as if he were watching someone else's life unfold in a place where he no longer fit. Every sharp point of business strategy, every line in his quarterly reports felt insignificant compared to the small girl wiping the floor with shaky hands and the woman too weak to stand for long. They had no leverage, no hidden motives, no bargaining chips. Yet, their presence filled his mind more than any investor ever had. He sat at his desk late into the evening, long after his staff had gone home. At one point, he looked up Lily's name on the intake sheet from the dry cleaner, and his assistant, curious, asked who she was. Michael didn't give a full explanation. He simply replied, "Someone I'm supporting." And that was it. He was already crafting a plan. Not just a one-time donation, but a solid, lasting framework. He didn't want to be a fleeting act of charity. He aimed to create something that would endure, even when the news moved on or the emotional weight faded. The next day, he went back to Sarah and Lily's apartment. This time, he brought groceries, medications, and a contact list for one of the top oncologists in the city. Sarah eyed the bags warily, as if they might carry hidden strings. She didn't say thank you right away. Instead, she started unpacking them slowly, her movements deliberate but shaky. Michael noticed her hands tremble slightly as she placed a jar of peanut butter in the cupboard, realizing how much effort simple tasks demanded from her. "I don't know how much time I have," she said after a pause, avoiding his gaze. "But I'm not giving up." Lily doesn't need sympathy. She needs someone to show her it's okay to keep hoping. Michael nodded, unsure how to reply to such raw honesty. He glanced down the hallway toward Lily's room and asked softly, "Is it all right if I spend some time with her? I think she has questions, and maybe I can help answer them." Sarah hesitated, then gave a weary nod. "Just be careful what you promise." He found Lily on her bedroom floor, surrounded by a few worn-out toys that looked like they'd been passed down more than once. She was coloring a piece of paper with nearly dried-out markers, working with intense focus. When she saw him in the doorway, she gave a small wave. Not quite a smile, but not fear either. He sat cross-legged a few feet away. "What are you drawing?" he asked. "A house," she said. "But it's not ours." "Whose is it?" "I don't know yet," she answered. "I think it's the one I'll live in when I get my dad back." Michael's chest tightened. He leaned forward slightly. "Lily, can I tell you something about dads?" She nodded. "Sometimes," he said carefully. "A dad isn't someone you have to pay for. Sometimes he's someone who chooses to stay because he wants to." She looked at him with serious eyes. "But mine left." "I know," he said softly, "and I don't think that was your fault. Not even a little." She looked down at her hands, twisting a marker cap between her fingers. "Mama says he had to go." "She told me that too," he admitted. "But I think she was trying to shield you from something painful." Lily didn't cry. Instead, she asked, "Are you going to disappear too?" Michael was caught off guard by the question, but kept his composure. "No," he said firmly. "I won't disappear. I might not always have the perfect answers, and I won't always do everything right, "But I promise I'll stay." She stared at him for a long moment, then, as if testing his words, leaned slightly toward him. It wasn't a hug, not even a touch, just a small shift of her weight toward where he sat. The kind of gesture kids make when they want to believe in something but aren't sure they're allowed to yet. Michael stayed still. He sat there with her as long as she needed, listening as she colored and talked about the rooms in the house she was drawing. One for her, one for her mom, and one for someone who might pay for her new dad if they could afford him. That was the moment he realized this wasn't just about aiding a stranger. It was about fixing something broken, about showing a little girl that love didn't need to be earned and that fathers weren't something to be purchased. They were people who stayed. Over the next few weeks, Michael's life began to shift in ways that didn't make news or show up in corporate reports, but were more meaningful than any business achievement he'd ever had. His schedule, once filled with early meetings and late-night calls with global investors, started to include visits to a modest apartment complex on the east side of town. Each visit began with groceries and small essentials, vitamins, books, new school supplies. But over time, those visits became less about what he brought and more about simply being there. Lily, cautious at first, began watching for him at the window. She never said it, never asked when he'd come, but Michael noticed her face brighten when his car pulled into the lot. Her guardedness was still there, hidden beneath the surface, but it was starting to give way to something else. Curiosity, maybe even trust. She asked more questions now, not just about the corporate world he lived in, but about the world she barely understood. She wanted to know how skyscrapers were constructed, how people decided who was in charge, and why some kids had fathers while others didn't. These were big questions for her small voice, but they always found their way into their talks. Sarah, meanwhile, was slowly regaining strength. The treatments Michael arranged were helping, bit by bit, giving her back small bursts of energy. She started sitting up longer, eating more, and even helping Lily with homework when she wasn't too exhausted. Her body was still weak, but her eyes held a spark that wasn't there when he first met her. One afternoon, as Michael helped her sort medical papers at the kitchen table, she looked up and said, "You've done more than I ever thought anyone would." He shook his head. "I haven't done anything special. I just couldn't walk away." "You stayed," she said. "That's what matters." The simplicity of her words hit him harder than he expected. For most of his life, staying hadn't been part of his plan. He built, grew, launched, and moved on. Emotional distance was a necessary habit, but with Sarah and Lily, leaving never even crossed his mind. As Lily grew more at ease, she started spending a few afternoons a week at Michael's office. His staff, shocked at first, quickly got used to her presence. She became something of an unofficial mascot. Polite, observant, always scribbling in the small notebook he'd given her on her first visit. He set up a little desk for her next to his, complete with colored pens and paper, and she decorated it with drawings of stick-figure families, tall buildings, and smiling faces. More than once, she sat through board meetings, listening closely as if she were soaking up the language of business by instinct. She never interrupted or fidgeted. It was as if she naturally understood the importance of observing quietly in a room where no one expected her to belong. One day, during a product strategy meeting, a junior manager suggested cutting costs by scrapping a small but socially meaningful program Michael's company funded for underprivileged youth. Before Michael could respond, Lily leaned toward him and whispered, "That sounds unkind," she whispered. Michael turned his head, holding back a grin, and murmured, "You're absolutely right." Later that day, as they strolled to the parking garage, Lily asked, "Do I get paid for helping at the office?" Michael laughed softly. "What kind of payment are you thinking?" She paused, tapping her chin with a playful flair. "One hot chocolate each time I come and maybe a sticker." "Deal," he said, extending his hand for a shake. Over time, Michael began to notice something else. His life beyond Sarah and Lily was changing too. His coworkers seemed gentler, more understanding. His executive assistant started leaving little notes of encouragement on his desk. People opened up more, even during meetings. The office atmosphere shifted, not by plan, but through Lily's quiet influence. Her small presence reminded everyone that the world was bigger than profit margins. And sometimes the tiniest person in the room held the most significance. Still, there were difficulties. One afternoon, Sarah called him in a panic. Lily had come home from school crying after a classmate told her she was strange for not having a dad. When Michael arrived, Lily was in her room, curled up on her bed, clutching her notebook tightly. He sat beside her and asked if she wanted to talk. At first, she shook her head. But then she whispered, "Maybe if I was smarter or kinder, he would have stayed." Michael felt a surge of anger. Not at her, but at the man who'd left her with that thought by walking away. He took a deep breath and said, "Lily, your dad didn't leave because of who you are. He left because of who he is. Your intelligence, your kindness, your bravery, those are all you. That's what makes you incredible." She didn't reply right away, but eventually, she rested her head on his arm. "Then why did you stay?" He thought for a long moment. "Because someone like you deserves someone who doesn't leave." That night, after Sarah had gone to bed, Michael sat in his car outside their building for a long time, staring at the dashboard, reflecting on everything he'd learned over the past month. He hadn't planned for this. He hadn't been searching for someone to save. But by showing up, by staying, by listening, he'd stumbled into something greater than duty. He was becoming part of their story. And that story was no longer just about getting by. It was about rebuilding something priceless. A sense of security, a fresh start, a home. It was late October when the past came crashing back in a way none of them expected. The leaves had begun to change, and Lily had collected a handful on her way home from school, pressing the brightest ones into a scrapbook Michael had bought her. Things had started to feel almost calm. Sarah was responding well to treatment. Lily was doing better at school, and Michael found himself thinking of them not just as people he was helping, but as a permanent part of his life. Something he couldn't imagine ending, but peace, as he was learning, was delicate. The first sign was a letter in an official-looking envelope addressed to Sarah, delivered on a rainy Thursday morning. At first, she thought it was another hospital bill, or a reminder about her treatment schedule. But when she opened it, her hand started to tremble. The letter was from a lawyer. Her ex-husband, Thomas, had reappeared and was demanding legal recognition of his parental rights. He claimed he wanted to be part of Lily's life again. He even had the nerve to suggest financial compensation for giving up those rights, hinting he'd only back off if there was something in it for him. Michael arrived that evening to find Sarah pale and quiet. The letter spread out on the kitchen table. He read it once, then again, his expression darkening with each word. Lily was in the other room, singing softly to herself while drawing, completely unaware of the chaos that had just arrived. Sarah looked at Michael and whispered, "He's back. Not for her. For money. He's not even pretending otherwise." Michael clenched his jaw, trying to keep his voice steady. "He has no right. He abandoned both of you. We have records, witness statements, hospital reports. If he thinks he can bully you into paying him, he's mistaken." But Sarah wasn't afraid of the legal fight. She was terrified of what it would do to Lily. "She still talks about him like he's a hero she lost. I never corrected her. I let her believe he was taken, not that he ran." "You did that to protect her," Michael said. "And now it might break her," she whispered. The days that followed were filled with lawyer meetings, paperwork, and emotional challenges. Michael hired his firm's top legal team to handle the case. He insisted on paying all fees and ensured they filed a formal petition to terminate Thomas's rights based on abandonment, financial theft, and emotional neglect. It wasn't just about protecting Sarah anymore. It was about shielding Lily from a man who had never loved her the way she deserved. The hardest part was deciding when and how to tell Lily. They couldn't keep the truth hidden forever, not with court dates looming or the chance that Thomas might try to contact her directly. One evening, as they sat on the floor playing a board game, Sarah gently placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder and said, "Sweetheart, we need to talk about something." Lily looked up instantly, alert. "Did I do something wrong?" No, Sarah said quickly. "This isn't your fault. It's about your dad." Lily's expression shifted, not to a smile but to a cautious glimmer of hope. "Is he coming back?" Michael's heart ached at the question. Sarah looked at him, then back at Lily. "We thought he might, but not for the reasons we'd want. He's not coming to be your dad again. He's coming because he wants something he shouldn't ask for." Lily blinked, trying to make sense of it. "Like money?" "Yes," Sarah said. "But more than that, he's trying to scare us, and we don't want him to hurt you or make you feel like you're not enough, because none of this is your fault." Lily didn't cry. She sat very still, processing. "So, he left because he didn't want to be my dad." Sarah opened her mouth to respond, but no words came. Michael stepped in, gently taking Lily's hand. "He left because he couldn't be the kind of dad you needed. That says nothing about you. It says everything about him." For a long moment, Lily stayed silent. Then she whispered, "But I'm still worth loving, right?" Michael nodded firmly, his voice steady. "You are worth loving every single day, and you are loved by your mom, by me, and by everyone who truly sees you." In the weeks that followed, the court proceedings began. Thomas appeared in court, arrogant, reckless, and full of shallow charm. He spoke of Lily like she was a distant friend, using her name as a tool, but showing no real understanding of who she was. He didn't know her favorite animal, couldn't recall her birthday, and when the judge asked for her middle name, he stumbled. Michael, sitting beside Sarah in the courtroom, felt rage build in his chest, but stayed calm for Lily's sake. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and a tired face, saw through Thomas quickly. The proof was overwhelming. Documents showed years of abandonment, no child support, no contact, and theft from Sarah that had left her and her daughter nearly homeless. The judge asked Sarah what she wanted, and she answered softly, "Freedom for my daughter, from ever thinking he left because of her." That one sentence held more power than all the legal papers in the room. The judge ruled in Sarah's favor. Thomas's parental rights were fully terminated. He had no legal claim, no right to contact Lily again. When the gavel fell, there was no cheering, no celebration, just the sound of breaths let out in relief. Outside, the courthouse, Lily held Michael's hand tightly. She didn't ask about the ruling. She just said, "You stayed." He knelt beside her and said, "And I'll always stay." In that moment, he realized a truth. Staying wasn't a one-time promise. It was a choice made every day, with every action, and he had no plans to stop. The weeks after the court decision brought a new kind of quiet to Sarah and Lily's apartment. It wasn't the heavy silence that once filled every corner, shaped by fear and uncertainty. Now, it was the calm of relief, of breathing freely without looking back. It was healing, slow, gentle, but real. Lily, still working through things in her own way, stopped asking about her father. The subject, once a daily question, faded from her talks. She no longer mentioned him at dinner or included him in drawings of families. Instead, she started talking about the future, school projects, art, and whether they could visit a zoo. When spring arrived, it wasn't a rejection of the past. It was something better, a quiet choice to move ahead. Michael became even more involved in their lives, not because he had to. No one asked him to show up every Saturday morning with pancakes, and a bag of groceries to help Lily with her spelling words at night, or to pick Sarah up from the clinic when she was too weak to drive. But he did it anyway, not for thanks, but because it felt like what he was meant to do. His own apartment, once perfectly organized and rarely used, now felt strange to him. He spent most evenings at Sarah's, reading on the couch while Lily fell asleep to the sound of her mother's breathing from down the hall. At the office, things had changed too. Michael was still the same sharp strategic mind in boardrooms, still expected to make tough decisions. But people noticed a difference. He was more patient now. He remembered birthdays. He stopped to ask about people's kids and listened to their answers. He talked about long-term goals, not just for growth and profit, but for legacy. He began asking questions that had nothing to do with profits and everything to do with impact. One afternoon, after a strategy meeting, his assistant knocked softly on his door. "Michael," she said, "there's a girl at reception asking for you." He looked up from his desk, all ready. Knowing who it was, Lily walked into the office, her backpack slightly crooked, holding a hand-drawn card in both hands. It was folded unevenly and covered in glitter. She handed it to him without a word and waited. He opened it carefully. Inside, in wobbly handwriting, it read, "Thank you for staying. You're the dad I thought I had to buy, but you were free all along." Michael had never received anything so meaningful in his life. No award, no paycheck, no bonus carried the weight of that card. He placed it on his desk like a treasure and swallowed the lump in his throat before pulling her into a hug. Sarah, too, was different, stronger. The treatments were still tough, but her spirit was no longer fragile. She had started writing again. Essays, stories, small reflections she saved on her laptop but hadn't shared yet. Michael read one by mistake. A file left open when she asked him to fix a tech issue. It was titled "The Man Who Stayed." In it, she described a person who entered her life unexpectedly, with no intention to stay, but chose to anyway. She wrote that hope isn't loud or showy. It's quiet and steady. It's someone showing up over and over again. He didn't mention it to her, but later that night, when she looked tired and leaned against him on the couch, he said softly, "I'm not going anywhere." "You know?" She replied, "I know." And in her voice was something new, not just trust, but peace. The three of them began to move as a unit, not in big declarations, but in small, solid ways. Sunday mornings were for pancake breakfasts and grocery lists. School nights included spelling quizzes and bedtime stories. Evenings were filled with quiet, slow moments, folding laundry together, watching movies with mismatched subtitles, falling asleep during thunderstorms with the windows slightly open. None of it was perfect. There were still tough days. Sarah still had treatments that drained her for days. Lily still had nightmares. Michael still struggled to balance work with the pull of a life that had nothing to do with spreadsheets. But in the midst of 9 system, I noticed the script was cut off mid-sentence. I'll rewrite the full 5th part as provided, ensuring no lines are missed. The word count is maintained or increased. Simple words are used, and the story and meaning remain unchanged without adding anything new. Below is the corrected rewrite. Thomas showed up in court, smug, careless, and full of empty charm. He spoke about Lily like she was someone he barely knew, using her name as a bargaining chip, without understanding who she truly was. He didn't know her favorite animal, couldn't remember her birthday, and when the judge asked for her middle name, he hesitated. Michael, sitting next to Sarah in the courtroom, felt anger rising in his chest, but stayed calm for Lily's sake. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and a weary expression, saw through Thomas quickly. The evidence was overwhelming. Records showed years of abandonment, no child support, no contact, and theft from Sarah that had left her and her daughter on the edge of homelessness. The judge asked Sarah what outcome she wanted, and she replied quietly, Freedom for my daughter, from ever believing he left because of her. That single sentence carried more weight than all the legal documents. Sen. In the server Tomspon, the judge ruled in Sarah's favor. Thomas's parental rights were officially ended. He had no legal claim or right to contact Lily again. When the gavel came down, there was no cheering or celebration, just the sound of breaths released in relief. Outside the courthouse, Lily held Michael's hand tightly. She didn't ask about the ruling. She simply said, "You stayed." He knelt beside her and said, "And I always will." In that moment, he realized a truth. Staying wasn't a one-time promise. It was a choice made every day through every action. And he had no intention of stopping. The weeks after the court ruling brought a new kind of quiet to Sarah and Lily's apartment. It wasn't the tense silence that once lingered in every corner, shaped by fear and uncertainty. Now, it was the calm of relief, of breathing freely without looking back. It was healing, slow, subtle, but real. Lily, still processing everything in her own way, stopped asking about her father. The topic, once a daily curiosity, faded from her conversations. She no longer mentioned him at dinner or drew him in pictures of families. Instead, she began talking about the future, school projects, art, and whether they could visit a zoo when spring came. It wasn't a rejection of the past. It was something better, a quiet choice to move forward. Michael became even more involved in their lives, not out of obligation. No one asked him to show up every Saturday morning with pancakes and groceries, to help Lily with her spelling words in the evening, or to drive Sarah home from the clinic when she was too weak to drive. But he did it anyway, not for thanks, but because it felt like what he was meant to do. His own apartment, once perfectly organized and rarely lived in, now felt foreign to him. He spent most evenings at Sarah's, reading on the couch while Lily fell asleep to the sound of her mother's breathing down the hall. At the office, things had changed too. Michael was still the same sharp strategic mind in boardrooms. Still, expected to make tough calls, but people noticed a difference. He was more patient now. He remembered birthdays. He stopped to ask how people's kids were doing and listened to their answers. He spoke about long-term goals, not just in terms of growth and profit, but about legacy. He started asking questions that had nothing to do with margins and everything to do with impact. One afternoon, after a strategy meeting, his assistant knocked gently on his door. "Michael," she said, "there's a girl at reception asking for you." He looked up from his desk, already knowing who it was. Lily walked into the office, her backpack slightly askew, holding a hand-drawn card in both hands. It was folded unevenly and covered in glitter. She handed it to him without a word and waited. He opened it carefully. Inside, in shaky handwriting, it read, "Thank you for staying. You're the dad I thought I had to buy, but you were free the whole time." Michael had never received anything so meaningful in his life. No award, no paycheck, no bonus carried the weight of that card. He placed it on his desk like a priceless treasure and swallowed the lump in his throat before pulling her into a hug. Sarah, too, was different, stronger. The treatments were still hard, but her spirit was no longer fragile. She had started writing, again, essays, stories, little reflections she stored on her laptop but hadn't shared yet. Michael read one by accident, a file left open when she asked him to help with a tech issue. It was titled, "The Man Who Didn't Leave." In it, she described a person who entered her life uninvited, with no plan to stay, but chose to anyway. She wrote that hope isn't loud or dramatic. It's quiet and consistent. It's someone showing up again and again. He didn't mention it to her, but later that night, when she looked tired and leaned against him on the couch, he said softly, "I'm not going anywhere." "I know," she replied, and in her voice was something new. Not just trust, but peace. The three of them began to move as a unit, not in grand declarations, but in small, unshakable ways. Sunday mornings were for pancake breakfasts and grocery lists. School nights included spelling quizzes and bedtime stories. Evenings were filled with slow, quiet moments, folding laundry together, watching movies with mismatched subtitles, falling asleep during thunderstorms with the windows cracked just slightly open. None of it was perfect. There were still hard days. Sarah still had treatments that knocked her down for days at a time. Lily still had nightmares. Michael still struggled to balance work with the pull of a life that had nothing to do with spreadsheets. But in the middle of all that, they had created something rare. Stability that didn't come from money or power, but from the steady, unglamorous practice of being there for one another. And Michael, who had once believed his legacy would be his business or influence, started to understand something far more powerful. His real legacy wouldn't be what he built, but who he stood beside when everything else fell away. Winter settled over the city with a quiet persistence, coating rooftops with a thin layer of snow and filling the air with a chill that made you pause before stepping outside. For most people, it was a season of holidays, warmth, and tradition. For Michael, Sarah, and Lily, it was the first season they faced together as something more than friends, more than people thrown together by chance. They didn't call themselves a family out loud, but everything about their days spoke that word silently and clearly. Lily had grown taller in the months since Michael first met her, and her confidence had grown too. She no longer hesitated before speaking in groups, no longer lowered her eyes when adults asked her questions. Lily had started calling Michael my person, a phrase she'd come up with quietly one day at school when her teacher asked her to describe the most important adult in her life. "He's not my dad," she'd said plainly, "but he's my person." When Sarah shared the story with Michael later, he smiled but stayed quiet. He didn't want to rush or force feelings that hadn't fully settled yet. But deep inside, those words took root in him, grounding him in a way he hadn't expected. Sarah's health, though still fragile, had steadied enough for her to pick up some old hobbies. She started volunteering a few afternoons a week at a nearby community center, helping tutor kids and leading reading sessions for children who reminded her of Lily. She didn't talk about it much with Michael, but he noticed how her smile changed after those visits, as if a part of her that had been asleep had started to feel useful again. She still had days when exhaustion weighed her down like a heavy blanket, but those moments no longer defined her. They existed alongside moments of happiness, progress, and a slow, steady return to herself. Michael was learning too. Learning to be present in a way that didn't come with a manual or promises. He'd mastered so many things in life: finance, leadership, handling crises. But this was different. There were no reports to measure success, no charts to track emotional growth. He learned through doing, tying Lily's shoes before school, cooking dinner with Sarah even when they were both tired, figuring out when Sarah needed space and when she needed quiet company. He learned how to sit in silence and let it be enough. But just as they found a rhythm, life brought another challenge. Not a loud one, but the kind that quietly tests everything you've built. Michael's board of directors called an urgent meeting. A powerful international company had made a merger offer. It was bold, profitable, and time-sensitive. A deal that could take the company to new heights, but might push Michael out as CEO. He spent hours reviewing documents, projections, and risks. Every part of his business instincts told him this was the peak of everything he'd worked for. It was clean, logical, and powerful. But amid all the numbers, he kept thinking about the crayon drawing taped inside his office cabinet. The one Lily had labeled Our Life Plan. It showed hearts, a house, and 3 stick figures holding hands. That night, Sarah found him on her apartment balcony, staring out at the snowy streets. "Big day?" she asked, stepping beside him, pulling a blanket around her shoulders. He nodded. "They want to buy everything. I could walk away with enough money to vanish into the world forever." She looked at him quietly for a long moment, Is that what you want? To disappear. He shook his head slowly. I don't think I ever wanted money just for money. I just didn't know what else to want. Now, I want her to feel safe, he said. I want you to feel strong. I want Sunday mornings, spelling tests, and board games. I want to matter when no one's watching. Sarah's hand found his. Then you already have everything they're trying to sell you. He made his choice the next day. He turned down the merger. His board didn't understand, and some investors threatened to leave. But Michael didn't waver. He explained his reasons calmly and clearly. When he left the meeting, he felt more rooted than he ever had in a room full of money. That evening, as they sat around a small artificial Christmas tree Sarah had pulled from storage, Lily handed Michael a little box wrapped in crumpled tissue paper. Inside was a homemade paper medal, drawn with markers and stapled with ribbon. It said, "Best man who stays." He looked up, his throat tight. "What's this for?" "For choosing us," Lily said. Even when you didn't have to. For the first time in a long time, Michael didn't feel like a man just helping a struggling family. He felt like a man who had found his own place. Spring arrived quietly, slipping in between late snows and early blooms. With it came a lightness none of them expected. The cold, fear, and uncertainty that once filled every corner of Sarah's apartment began to fade. Not all at once, and not without effort, but steadily, like the thawing ground outside. The days grew longer, the air warmer, and their lives felt like they were finally breathing. Sarah's health had improved. Her treatments were less frequent, and her strength was returning in noticeable ways. She started cooking again, trying out old recipes she'd nearly forgotten. She laughed more, read more, and even began outlining a children's book inspired by Lily's drawings and stories. Her hair had started growing back, short and soft, and she no longer avoided mirrors. There was a quiet pride in her now, not because the worst was over, but because she had survived it and still had the courage to look forward. Lily had blossomed too. Lily's teacher sent home glowing reports about her reading progress and her leadership in class. She had started a small kindness club at school, helping kids who felt left out, and insisted on making care packages with Sarah for the children's ward at the hospital. But more than her achievements, it was her confidence that showed the change. She no longer tiptoed through life. She didn't search for her father's shadow in crowds or ask impossible questions. Instead, she asked Michael to teach her how to type, how to make pancakes, and how to fold the corners of fitted sheets. A task he hadn't mastered but pretended to know, just to make her laugh. Michael no longer saw Sarah and Lily as separate from his life. They weren't guests in his schedule. They were his schedule. He had shifted most of his work to a remote setup, restructured leadership at his company, and hired a new operations director to manage daily tasks. He still held the CEO title, but he rarely sat in his corner office anymore. His days were measured differently now, not by profits or deals, but by breakfast cooked, homework checked, and bedtime stories read. One sunny Sunday morning in May, they packed a picnic and drove to a quiet lake an hour outside the city. It was the first time in years Sarah had traveled far from home without a doctor's appointment or medical need. They spread a blanket under a tree and unpacked sandwiches, fruit, and a homemade pie Lily had insisted on baking. The crust was too thick, the filling a bit tart, but they didn't care. They ate every bite. After lunch, while Lily chased ducks near the water's edge, Sarah leaned against Michael and watched her daughter with a gentle smile. "You know," she said, "she used to think she had to earn everything. Love, attention, safety, even me. She used to ask what she could do to be worth keeping." Michael closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them slowly. "She doesn't ask that anymore." "No," Sarah said. "Now she just knows she's worth it. That's because of you, Michael." He shook his head gently. "We all did it together." They sat quietly for a while, the breeze moving softly around them. Then Sarah reached into the picnic basket and pulled out a folded envelope. "I wasn't sure when to give you this," she said, "but now feels right." Michael took it carefully and opened it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, an adoption request signed by Sarah, asking that Michael be granted legal guardianship of Lily. His eyes moved slowly over the words, then back to Sarah's face. "She asked me to draw it up," Sarah said, softly. "I told her it wasn't just a piece of paper. I told her it had to mean something real. And she said, it already does. I just want it to mean something to others too." Michael's throat tightened. He looked out at the lake, where Lily was waving at them from a log, her hair wild in the wind, her smile bright and fearless. He looked back at Sarah, who reached for his hand, her grip warm and steady. "I'm not trying to replace anyone," he said finally. "I just want her to know I'll always be here." "She already knows," Sarah whispered. "This is just the part where we say it out loud. The paperwork would take time. There would be meetings, background checks, and formalities. But none of that mattered, because in every way that counted, they were already a family. Not a perfect one, not one without history or scars, but a real one, built not by blood or duty, but by choice and love that had been tested and proven over and over." That night, after they returned home, Lily climbed into Michael's lap and asked if she could call him Dad. She didn't look unsure or nervous. She asked like it was the most natural thing in the world. Michael smiled, his voice catching just a little. "Yeah, I'd like that." She nodded once, content, then leaned her head against his chest and whispered, "Told you I didn't have to buy you." In that simple, small, perfect moment, Michael knew he had become the man he never thought he could be. A man who stayed, a man who chose, a man who loved and was loved in return. A father. This story doesn't end with a big twist or dramatic moment, but with something far stronger. Quiet, chosen love. What makes it beautiful is how deeply human it is. A little girl, hurt by abandonment, learns that love doesn't need to be earned or bought. A mother, tired and ill, finds strength, not just in surviving, but in letting someone stand beside her. And a man who had everything but connection discovers that the greatest success isn't building an empire. It's building a home. What resonates most is the idea that family isn't always about blood. Sometimes it's about the people who choose to stay, who show up day after day, even when it's hard, even when there's nothing to gain but the simple, priceless act of being there. This isn't just a story of rescue. It's a story of transformation for all three of them. And in that transformation, we're reminded that love doesn't always arrive with a bang. Sometimes it slips in quietly, puts down roots, and stays forever.